Hey, this is John. Today I just wanted to spend some time talking about the economics of Ayn Rand today. There we, there we go. We're going to focus on her work in Atlas Shrugged, which is a fictional work, philosophical fiction, basically about laissez-faire capitalism or free market capitalism. And my main contention, obviously, from the title of the video is that she didn't really understand economics very well. So, yeah. Now, if you liked the video, please like and subscribe. And I'm still doing that thing where I talk about a book I'm reading every week. So this week I'm actually rereading A Dog's Heart by Bulgakov. I'm rereading it because I was reading it in German, right? So basically, it's about a stray dog that has brain implanted into a wealthy Russian fellow, and then he still behaves like a dog. And so it's basically criticism of the Soviet era, uplifting the proletariat classes before they were ready, in Bulgakov's mind, anyways. So before I begin, I do want to showcase a clip just to make a point to juxtapose the public response to philosophy and its actual merits. So we're going to play the clip.
Author of Atlas Shrugged, a book that progressives literally cannot stand, and I wonder why.
How do we build roads, sanitation facilities, hospitals, schools? If the government is not permitted to force, if you will, by vote, taxation.
When you admit that you want to take money by force from someone and ask me how are we going to build hospitals or roads, you admit that someone is producing the money, the wealth, that will make those roads possible. Now you have no right to tell the man who produced the wealth in what way you want him to spend it. If you need his money, you can obtain it only by his voluntary.
So I just want you to notice a few things. First, obviously, the guy who showcased the clip seems to be really in love with the response that she gives. And I think that's probably to shape the opinion of the people who watch it thereafter. They see the guy going, wow, how did she know this back then? And then the actual response that she gives can be broken down pretty much as simply as restating the question: how do you get roads? How do you get hospitals built? And if I restate the question, then you realize very quickly that the answer that she gave had nothing to do with that, or at the very least, it doesn't even try to propose a solution. So I think that's really telling to a lot of the stuff that she actually brings forward. Now, the thing is, even if we supposed that the answer that she gave in response to this question actually had merit, let's break it down. The first point she starts with is you admit that somebody produces the wealth, right? Okay, that's just an arbitrary statement. It doesn't say anything, and yeah, you have to agree with it, but again, it doesn't say anything. So there's that. Then she leads, uses that to say, okay, you have no right to tell the man who produced the wealth how to spend it. And you can only obtain it with his voluntary consent. So first, obviously, it's not literally true that, government would need voluntary consent from the man, right? Because, there's literally tax systems in question here. So that's one. But two, who actually produces the wealth? Is it, workers, businessmen? Is it everyone? If it is everyone, then is the distinction between, say, spending on a societal level and producing on a societal level, distinguishing between, who has the rights to what, isn't that kind of arbitrary as well? And third, if we assumed that roads were indispensable, and we'll assume that because I think the other position is really, really hard to defend, though I'm sure you could try. Not that it'll actually stand, though. So, yeah. if we assumed that roads were indispensable, then as a sort of very rhetorical question, wouldn't it be the case that a centralized organization with clear objectives and systems would literally better spend that money than, say, an individual going out there and just, trying to accomplish those goals on their own? Well, and again, I'm asking that question very rhetorically. The answer is obviously yes. So yeah, they would better spend money, right? And that would be a more efficient system. So, anyways, even if you could respond to all the ways to actually literally dissect that, answer that I just gave, right? Um, it wouldn't change that it doesn't actually, like, the answer that you gave didn't really answer the question, anyways. So it still has no substance with respect to the question that was asked. And so, anyways, I think this is kind of a good starting point. So, what are the main points of Atlas Shrugged now? Well, basically, the uh, government coercion stops innovators and geniuses from producing. And then she also has, this idea of objectivism, which is the philosophy of viewing the world as objective, not as you want, right? Okay, that's all fine. I'm going to first remark, though, that, and again, this is a fictional work, right? It's displayed through, characters. There's these leeches, for example, the socialist losers of the world. And then there's the, I don't know, probably like the people that she thinks of as like the Ubermensch, like the supermen of the world, the entrepreneurs and the scientists and such, right? The innovators. So there's that, right? Those are all displayed through characters because it's in a fictional work. But the other is that there's not really anything new here in terms of philosophy. So she's basically taking a sort of misconception of classical economics into the laissez-faire capitalist system that she describes. And then obviously objectivism itself isn't really anything new either. So there's that. Now let's talk a little bit about market greed. Because I understand, for example, there's been a lot of wordsmithing recently, apparently, with people talking about, oh, like there's all these altruistic reasons to be greedy. Not really, right? So let's go through this though, because this is an argument that has been inherited from a misconception of classical economics, and it's been dead for a long time. Everyone knows it's not good to be greedy, but how do we know that it isn't good at a large scale to be greedy? Well, first, it's a pretty reasonable assumption to say, that a greedy person is first obviously going to look out for their best interests and that they will do so at the expense of others, and that often this results in hoarding behavior. So that's pretty, I think, a pretty reasonable assumption to make, for greedy people, right? Suppose then that being greedy was beneficial in the way of, as the classical economists would describe it, right? You go to another land, you take the gold, bring it back home. Now you guys have more gold, right? And it all gets shared around. So suppose it was beneficial in that way of, you bring money back home, so to speak. Well, I think it's pretty obvious that if everyone behaved greedy first, that this effect would cancel out, because again, whether you're looking at it at a inter-nation level, if you will, these nations take from other nations and bring back, right? That'll cancel out. And then also within the societies, unless they hoard, by the way, which we'll also get to, and within the societies as well, because, individuals can kind of transact with each other, but then there's also these other effects, like, they bring it back home, and then the price of goods increases, just again as one effect, right? Single effect. Due to the increased amount of currency in circulation, and that will reduce the purchasing power of people, right? So there's that. It's pretty obvious that not everyone can, go and bring money home and then hoard, right? That's pretty obvious, I think. Now, then suppose that, a single person were greedy, well, that person would still, serve the best interest by hoarding, and then you would have the sort of like money, the total amount of wealth in the economy has increased, yes, but the money in circulation for everyone else, or the asset values for everyone else, is concentrated and removed. They don't have access to that big pile of gold if a single person is hoarding, right? That's pretty clear too. And then, if you suppose, okay, well, it's not one person, it's not everyone, it's kind of just some number of people we don't exactly know that are greedy. Well, they still do as much hoarding as possible. And this is, we literally see in real time. One way that we see this is with investing in companies, mostly of, large cap sizes, when you already have a lot of money, right? And in fairness, this is kind of part of the system of greed, so to speak, because they don't necessarily have another option. How do you move, say, $1 trillion worth of assets into investments, right? Well, you kind of have to go into big companies. And then I'll also add, well, when you go and invest in these big companies at such large levels, well, you also become owners of the company. So the wealth goes right back to you. Anyways, all this to say that a system built on greed is got obvious problems. And the main result is, one, taking money out of circulation for you, so that you get left with a lower income, for example. And that makes it harder to afford basic things. And then two, when people go and buy assets with all the wealth that they have, the action of buying increases the price itself, right? And that also pushes, then obviously, for things like houses, the price goes up, and then they become further out of reach. Okay, so I suppose it's kind of interesting that the basically the issue of hoarding appears in all three cases and has the same effect. It's almost like it's very, very obvious that, so like, this doesn't work. And again, it's I don't know how much I don't appreciate that Adam Smith's work has been bastardized to support kind of a stupid belief, but I do know I don't appreciate it. Okay. Second, second point regarding the book, right? Individual innovators is a historically interesting concept. So even if you look at the achievements of some of the historically esteemed scientists, for example, they had what were called slaves, and this is sort of your modern employee, if you will. And the just kind of in a bit of a funny tangent, if you look at the history of the use of the word employee, and the way that it's changed over time, depending on which region, occupation, and time you're looking at, slaves were often equivalents functionally to what we understand to be employees today. So that's kind of an interesting observation. But the slaves in these labs are effectively lab assistants who then didn't have the rights to the products of their labor, right? So, my question then is, okay, well, are the people who are facilitating labs, the scientists who then take the products of the labor, are they mooching off of the employees in any sense? Well, the answer is obviously yes. And then, it's a matter of to what extent, right? Um, so they provide space and equipment, for example. But my question then is also, okay, well, how did they get their space and equipment in the first place? You are often going to end up circulating on the idea that, well, maybe government intervention is actually a good thing, and maybe we do need, for example, maybe even if we didn't need, right, that it's optimal and it's most efficient for the government to say provide things like subsidies for labs using tax dollars. And now just kind of like talk through this example, because obviously you do need equipment to do science, right? So if you thought, okay, well, I do science to earn my money to buy the equipment, that obviously is going to completely break down because you need the equipment to do science, right? Okay, so that doesn't make sense. So then you're going to say, okay, well, we worked somewhere else and we saved up, $2 million for a tiny lab. Probably not. And even if you did, is that really so efficient? Especially if there's funds or equipment somewhere else already to put the equipment in there through say government intervention, right? Okay, so maybe you worked I don't know, as a lab technician or something for however long. It still wouldn't change the fact that somewhere along the line somebody intervened to get the equipment, or indirectly or directly used capital that somehow came in their hands, and there's not really a good explanation for it. I would say just under these mechanisms, at least not as the result of their labor or innovation. Okay, so who are the innovators really in society anyways? Well, it's obviously the employees, and those do range quite a bit. They range from the people that innovate on the ad count on videos so that it's annoying enough that you are incentivized to purchase a subscription. So it ranges from those people to the people that solve work on solutions to cancer and create fun video games, right? So innovators, employees, but there's a kind of a wide range, and it's not exactly clear how many people are actually that important. Yeah, I do think that there is some reason to have these system thinkers, or people that sit at the top and organize everything at play, because it's very difficult for these sort of like uncoordinated pieces to coordinate themselves. Those people are called managers, though, not asset owners. So yeah, and I think it's a pretty rudimentary statement to say that if you have a thing that functions, that taking away things that are not part of the functioning components or processes or whatever, that it's not going to do anything, and it's therefore superfluous, obviously. So if the optimal system is to reward innovators, does Ayn Rand's philosophy support the innovators, or does it support the system thinkers? And if so, does it account for the fact that these people have capital in the first place? Or how does it account for the fact that these people have the capital in the first place to go and spend money and innovate, right? And how does it deal with things like public-private partnerships, which are when the money from the government our tax dollars are used to invest into private companies. If you believed that, for example, capital investments, or when you spend money, that you'll have to receive some kind of profit, or is the profit to the people whose tax money gets used to fund these operations? Well, you don't get any, you get ripped off. And if she believes that, labor and capital are labor and innovation are the sole producers of capital in the market, then, one, this is just wrong. It's demonstrably wrong. We know that. And two, isn't this just Marxism hiding from itself? Okay, so I'm gonna make one last point. I'm just gonna show another clip though before I do that kind of encapsulates that.
And you believe that there should be no right by the government to tax. You believe that there should be no such thing as welfare legislation, unemployment compensation, regulation during times of stress, certain kinds of rent controls and things like that.
That's right. I'm opposed to all forms of control. I am for an absolute, laissez-faire, free, unregulated economy. Let me put it briefly. I'm for the separation of state and economics, just as we had separation of state and church, which led to peaceful coexistence among different religions after a period of religious wars. So the same applies to economics. If you separate the government from economics, if you do not regulate production and trade, you will have peaceful cooperation and harmony and justice among men.
Okay, so this is basically the argument of the book, that it's pretending that all control in the markets is from the government alone. I will also say that I think it's extremely odd that she commented on peaceful cooperation amongst religions as, her analogous reasoning to say that, markets should be free too. The reason this is weird is because, one, this, the result that she states is only really true to a certain extent in certain places. And two, this deals with beliefs that don't have a directly tangible, systemic, physical effect on people's lives, like their income and the quality of the streets, right? Obviously, freedom of religion is not, doesn't have people fight over living standards, I would say. And I wanted to be very clear when I said those words, because I understand that you can wordsmith your way into, things that don't actually deal with what I said. And you can say things like, oh, well, what about charity, for example? Or what about protests from these organizations? And again, these aren't what I'm talking about, and that's pretty obvious, but, I can I try to get ahead of them by just making it very specific, directly, physically, tangible, systemic effects. Okay, cool. Now, obviously, she has presupposed in, sort of her main thing that government is the only form of coercion on the markets, and this is, it's obviously not true. I don't know how this is supposed to account for the idea that, or, how she would respond necessarily to, how corporate coercion literally impedes on some of their most beloved concepts like freedom, that a lot of the proponents of this philosophy love. So, for example, is it not the case that, choosing between working and starving is literally limiting the amount of choices that you have available to you, such that it clearly restricts your freedom, and that comes from an outside force, therefore it's literally coercion, right? And that's all rhetorical, obviously, because the questions answer themselves. So yeah. Anyways, all in all, I think that the biggest problem with the philosophy is that it tries too much to caricature, uh, well, frankly, socialism and capitalism. Um, so yeah, I think it's junk. Um, Maybe that's because, in large part, I am arguing with a dead person. Obviously, people can respond to my comments, of course, on the philosophy, though I think that it doesn't stand in um, basically any significant effect manner. It's late, very tired. Okay, but yeah, so look, okay, I think that's it. All right, fun yapping. Bye.